Hi everyone and welcome back to the NYCC podcast. Today we're joined by Sarah Jane and we're going to be talking about endometriosis.
So Sarah Jane Harrison, I work at White Rose House on the court protection team.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
So endometriosis is tissue similar to the lining of your womb, people usually say, that grows in places that it shouldn't. That usually every month a woman would pass this. Majority of women have small amounts of endometriosis that will just pass naturally, it won't grow. But yeah, it's this tissue that stays behind and eventually builds up, and it's like a weed. And it just grows in places it shouldn't. It can start growing on the ovaries, the bowels, the bladder, and cause real complications.
It's quite hard to diagnose as well. It's only through like keyhole surgery that they can diagnose it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if the growth is that bad, they can see something on an ultrasound.
Oh, okay.
But that's not very often. That has to be like a real bad growth of endometriosis.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 14. That's why we've pinpointed it. My first ever period lasted 11 weeks, and my periods kept getting worse. But I thought it was normal, like your first periods and things like that. And I asked my parents about it, and they were the same. That's your first period, like that's the kind of thing that happens. It is usually like worse. And it went on for quite a while, to the point I was rushed into hospital one time. They thought I was having an ectopic pregnancy. By this point I was 15, and no matter how much I stressed, I hadn't engaged in any sexual activity at that point. They wouldn't listen, but thankfully they didn't in a way. And they went in to have a look because they thought they were going to do an emergency surgery to remove an ectopic pregnancy.
Right.
And that's when they found it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy, it was endometriosis. So I was diagnosed quite young.
The article that I was reading was saying that, women tend to just put up with it and are told to put up with it, and it's not until they sort of get to their late 20s that they start to maybe realise that that's not how other people's periods are, or that that's the time it's taken going through the GP system to sort of, for them to take it seriously.
I was told at a young age that they would advise me, if I can, to have children young, because it was only going to get worse if it was already that bad at that age. The likelihood was that I was going to have a hysterectomy early.
So they told you sort of straight away really that you should try and have children as early as possible.
Yeah.
So I think you got pregnant at 19, is that right? So you sort of took that advice and went with it.
I met my children's father when I was 18, and we kind of got discussing quite early on that we both wanted children. And he's like 6 years older than me, so he was like, yeah, I want kids. And I knew I wanted children. I came from a big family. I knew I wanted them young as well. I think even if I didn't have endometriosis, I would have wanted children young. And I fell pregnant at 19 with my son, who is now 13. So I was quite lucky. And then later in life, I had another child, and it was after that child that I had to have the hysterectomy. It was 4 years after my son we started trying, and it was like, why aren't I falling pregnant? Like it was taking so long, and I got referred back to a gynecologist who was fantastic, and he had a look, and the endometriosis grew quite badly. He removed it, and the way he worded it to me was like basically flushed my womb. and cleared the endometriosis off.
Yeah.
And I fell pregnant pretty quickly after that procedure. It was almost like he said, you almost need to be there straight away
Yeah.
before it starts again. But yeah, the only natural relief I had from endometriosis was when I was pregnant.
So then you had your 2 children, and then you ended up having to have a hysterectomy at 25, is that right? Could you
26.
26, yeah.
Yeah. So I had my daughter in the December, and I was 26 in the January. And things got quite bad after her, and it was getting really painful. I couldn't move. It felt like something just there was tension when I tried to stand up straight. It was almost like I always had to be crouched over. And I was about 26 and a half. They decided, right, I went in and it was an emergency hysterectomy, but they left
Okay.
my ovaries behind. And that was just so I could go through the natural process of menopause.
So obviously I work on the HR team, and I'm coming at this from, an employee wellbeing, and looking at how we can support our employees. There's actually a endometriosis support group at NYCC. It's a really great way of meeting people and sharing your experiences, getting advice. But I just wondered, from your perspective, like how has having endometriosis or the after effects of it affected your work?
Previous employment wasn't great. It wasn't with NYCC. It wasn't great because, again, it's the knowledge, it's knowing about it, it's not understanding it. And you can't blame people. Like, at the time, I'm 26 and a half and I'm needing a hysterectomy, and it's like, it's just period pains. So there wasn't a great deal of support then with employment. But I think nowadays it should be more understood. It shouldn't be such a taboo subject. It is a real thing. It's horrible. It's painful to the point sitting, standing, or lying down just isn't comfortable. And it's about taking yourself away mentally to try and compose yourself. And I think allowing that time for people who are going through it, allowing that time to just, whether it's half hour, 15 minutes, just to take yourself away, have a cry, get it out of your system, take some painkillers if you can. Because that's another thing, it's the painkillers. The only ones that'll help are the ones that'll make you drowsy. And working when you're drowsy obviously isn't the best thing. You're half asleep trying to do important work. And it's about employers understanding that you might need to take shorter days. There might be more painful times, like your cycle. You might need a little bit more flexibility around that time so that you are able to manage your pain relief. Because if you keep on top of it, actually keeping it in your system, you keep it at an even keel. And it's about employers knowing that they need to understand that taking that medication is so important.
Yeah, I'm actually at the beginning of the diagnostic process, I guess, to see whether or not I have endometriosis, and I've been prescribed some really strong painkillers, and it has changed already. I've only been on them for 2 months, but it has completely changed how I experience my period. And I get you with the strong painkillers. And it really affects your mind, but equally it's then been so beneficial. So I think it's just about learning for yourself how you can, if you need to start work a little bit later or be flexible like that, or take like a lower dosage, because actually my GP's now prescribed me like a lower dosage to take if I'm like in the work day, and then the higher one for like if it's like evening. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking on the podcast about your experience of endometriosis. I've just got one final question before we finish. What would your advice be to someone that thinks that they might have it?
go to the GP, discuss it. Do not go on online forums. Do not get tied into that, because that can be a real negative impact on your mental health.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, and from my experience as well, like I got some advice from the endometriosis support group at NYCC, who sort of told me a whole list of things that I needed to say, and it was really helpful. So again, if you think that you might have it, that's a great support group to go to for advice.